Rain pelted against the towering glass windows of National Trust Bank as Sarah Chen adjusted her Silicon Valley casual attire, a stark contrast to the suits and ties that filled the marble lobby. The $985,000 check felt heavy in her vintage leather messenger bag, a bag she'd kept since her startup days, eating ramen and coding until sunrise. Now, at 34, she ran a $50 million tech empire, though you wouldn't guess it from her relaxed demeanor and the paint-stained jeans she'd worn while redesigning her home office that morning. The security guard, an elderly man named Frank who had worked there for over 2 decades, offered her a warm smile as she shook the rain from her umbrella. He'd seen every type of person walk through those brass doors, but something about this young woman's confident stride caught his attention. Sarah returned his smile, her mind momentarily drifting to her father, who had worked as a janitor in a bank much like this one, struggling to put her through computer science classes at Stanford. The lobby's grandeur seemed to amplify every sound. The click of expensive heels, the rustle of tailored suits, the quiet murmur of privileged conversations. Sarah's sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, drawing a few raised eyebrows from the Thursday afternoon crowd. A young banker in an ill-fitting suit quickly averted his gaze when she caught him staring at her casual attire. She pulled out her phone, checking the latest updates from her development team in Singapore. Another successful system implementation. Another satisfied client. The notification reminded her why she was here. The check represented more than just money. It was validation of her company's latest breakthrough in AI-driven security protocols. The same protocols that had caught a potential $1 million fraud attempt at this very bank last quarter. The line at the teller windows moved at a glacial pace, giving Sarah time to observe the subtle theater of wealth and status playing out around her. To her left, a man in a tailored Brooks Brothers suit was being escorted to the premium banking section without a word. To her right, an elderly woman clutched her deposit slip like a lifeline, her Social Security check probably worth less than the watches some customers were wearing. Sarah absently touched the small jade pendant hanging from her neck, her mother's parting gift before she passed away 5 years ago. "Remember who you are," her mother had said, "but never forget where you came from." Those words had guided her through board meetings, investor pitches, and countless moments like this, where her appearance and heritage made others question her belonging. The bank's atmosphere remained stuck in a previous century, all mahogany panels and brass fixtures, oozing traditional banking stability. It was precisely the kind of environment her company was helping to modernize, dragging reluctant financial institutions into the digital age. The irony wasn't lost on her that the very systems running in the background were built by her team, many of whom dressed just like her. As the line inched forward, Sarah pulled out her laptop, using the time to review the presentation for next week's board meeting. The screen displayed complex algorithms and security protocols that would have looked like abstract art to most of the people around her. A young intern walking by did a double take of the code on her screen, his expression shifting from dismissal to recognition as he noticed the Tech Vision Solutions logo on her laptop sticker. The morning rain had intensified, drumming against the skylights and creating patterns of shadow and light across the marble floor. Sarah checked her watch, a simple digital timepiece that prioritized function over fashion. She had a video call with European investors in 2 hours and a lunch meeting with a potential client who specifically requested to meet the real person behind Tech Vision's success. Little did they know they'd be getting exactly that, paint-stained jeans and all. Finally, it was her turn. Sarah approached the teller window, already anticipating the familiar dance that was about to begin. She'd experienced it in Silicon Valley boardrooms, at international tech conferences, and even at her own company's holiday party, where she'd been mistaken for a caterer. The weight of the check in her bag seemed to grow heavier, not from its monetary value, but from the statement it was about to make. The teller's eyes widened at the check, her whispered call to the manager setting off a chain of events Sarah had experienced too many times before. As she waited, Sarah observed her reflection in the polished counter, successful CEO on one side, society's preconceptions on the other. Around her, other customers completed their transactions smoothly, their smaller checks accepted without question. The corner of her mouth twitched upward. She'd seen this movie before. Jessica, according to her name tag, was young, probably fresh out of college, with perfectly manicured nails that trembled slightly as she held Sarah's check. Her whispered conversation into the phone was barely audible, but Sarah caught fragments. Unusual amount. Not our regular customer, and should probably verify. The last phrase was accompanied by a quick, uncomfortable glance at Sarah's casual attire. Behind her, the line had grown longer, and Sarah could feel the weight of impatient stares boring into her back. A middle-aged woman in a designer suit made an audible text sound, the universal language of privileged inconvenience. Sarah maintained her composure, remembering similar moments throughout her career. The venture capital meetings where investors had addressed their questions to her male subordinates, the security guards who had trailed her at tech conventions. The lobby's ambient noise seemed to dim as other customers began noticing the unusual delay. Sarah pulled out her phone, pretending to check emails while actually recording the time and details of the interaction, a habit she'd developed after years of similar encounters. Her company's legal team had a folder full of such documentation, not for lawsuits, but for developing corporate training modules on unconscious bias. Jessica's discomfort grew visibly as she waited for her manager. Her eyes kept darting between the check and Sarah, as if trying to solve a complex equation that wouldn't balance. A senior teller at the next window leaned over to peek at the check, whispering something that made Jessica's cheeks flush red. The theatrical performance of their doubt would have been amusing if it weren't so familiar. Through the glass partition of the manager's office, Sarah could see Robert Thompson rising from his desk. His body language screamed authority, straightening his tie, adjusting his cuffs, preparing for what he clearly viewed as a potential security issue. Sarah recognized the type. She dealt with dozens of Robert Thompsons in her career, each one certain they knew exactly who could and couldn't possess a check of this size. The whispers had spread through the bank like ripples in a pond. 2 other tellers had stopped their transactions to watch. A security guard shifted his position, moving closer to Sarah's window. Even Frank, the friendly elderly guard from the entrance, looked concerned, though his expression held more worry for her than about her. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from her assistant reminding her about the upcoming contract renewal meeting with National Trust Bank's regional director. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. The same institution that was about to question her legitimacy relied heavily on her company's cybersecurity infrastructure. In fact, the very computer Jessica was using to process transactions ran on software her team had developed. The air conditioning hummed overhead, its cold breeze matching the increasingly chilly atmosphere around the teller window. Jessica had begun organizing and reorganizing the same stack of deposit slips, a nervous tick that betrayed her uncertainty about the situation. The woman behind Sarah had given up her impatient sighing and had taken to making quiet phone calls, presumably sharing the drama unfolding before her. Thompson's footsteps echoed across the marble floor as he approached, each step measured and deliberate. Sarah could practically see the assumptions forming in his mind, the mental arithmetic that couldn't reconcile her appearance with the number on the check. She straightened her posture slightly, not out of intimidation but preparation. This interaction would either end like countless others or become something entirely different. As Thompson made his way to the teller window, Sarah noticed something that others might have missed. A small plaque on the wall celebrating National Trust Bank's commitment to diversity and inclusion. The golden letters caught the morning light, gleaming with unintentional irony. Sarah's fingers drummed lightly on her laptop bag, where inside, beyond the check, she carried something far more valuable: the power to change the narrative. Robert Thompson emerged from his office like a general preparing for battle, his burgundy tie perfectly aligned with his starched shirt buttons. "Miss, if you could step into my office." The words dripped with fake courtesy. Sarah's phone buzzed. Another $1 million contract notification, as she silently followed him, cataloging every micro-expression, every subtle sign of bias she'd learned to document over years of breaking barriers. The short walk to his office felt like a carefully choreographed performance. Thompson positioned himself slightly ahead, playing the role of the authoritative banker escorting what he presumed to be a suspicious character. Sarah noticed how he kept glancing back, perhaps expecting her to bolt, a behavior she documented countless times in her personal journal titled Adventures in Being Underestimated. His office was a shrine to traditional banking. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound ledgers carefully arranged on shelves, and a wall of framed certificates declaring his financial expertise. A small digital clock on his desk seemed like the only object manufactured in the current century. The room smelled of leather and privilege, with a hint of the morning's coffee still lingering in the air. "Please, have a seat." Thompson gestured to a chair clearly positioned to be slightly lower than his own. Another power play she'd encountered throughout her career. Sarah chose instead to remain standing, pretending to take a work call while scanning the certificates on his wall. This subtle defiance caused Thompson to shift uncomfortably, his carefully scripted scenario already deviating from plan. "Miss Chen, is it?" He squinted at the check, his tone suggesting the name itself was somehow suspicious. "We have certain protocols for transactions of this nature." He emphasized nature, as if the word itself carried the weight of his prejudice. Sarah watched his reflection in the window behind his desk, noting how he angled his chair to maintain what he perceived as a position of authority. Through the glass walls of his office, the bank's daily operations continued, but Sarah could feel the covert glances from employees and customers alike. Jessica, the young teller, was now explaining the situation to her colleagues, her hands moving animatedly as she spoke. The theater of it all would have been amusing if it weren't so painfully familiar. Sarah's phone buzzed again, this time an email from Thompson's superior about next week's cybersecurity upgrade meeting. She allowed herself a small smile, knowing the shifting power dynamic that would soon unfold. Thompson interpreted her smile as nervousness, his confidence visibly growing as he pulled out a thick binder of security procedures. "You understand," he continued, his voice taking on a patronizing tone, "that we have a responsibility to our shareholders to verify any unusual transactions." He placed special emphasis on unusual, letting the word hang in the air like an accusation. "Perhaps you could explain the origin of these funds." His pen hovered over a blank form, ready to document what he clearly expected to be a revealing confession. Sarah noticed a small family photo on his desk, Thompson with his wife and daughter at what appeared to be a college graduation. The daughter wore a computer science department hoodie, and Sarah wondered if she too had faced similar prejudices in her field. The irony of Thompson potentially undermining his own daughter's future through his biases wasn't lost on her. The rain outside had intensified, creating a dramatic backdrop to the scene unfolding in the office. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the bank's logo on the wall, the same logo that appeared on the credit card in Sarah's wallet, the one designated for their most valuable corporate clients. She watched Thompson's mechanical movements as he prepared to launch into what was surely a well-rehearsed security speech. Frank, the security guard, passed by the office window, catching Sarah's eye. His expression had shifted from concern to curiosity, perhaps noting her composed demeanor in contrast to Thompson's increasingly nervous energy. He'd seen enough interactions like this to recognize when the typical script was about to be flipped. Sarah's laptop bag contained not just the check, but also the contracts proving her company's relationship with the bank, the security protocols her team had designed, and the future of banking itself. As Thompson cleared his throat to begin his interrogation, she calmly reached for her phone, preparing to transform this moment from yet another example of prejudice into something far more meaningful, a teaching moment that would resonate through the bank's corridors for years to come. "So, you're claiming this check is legitimate?" Thompson's fingers drummed against his mahogany desk. Sarah shifted in her seat, not from discomfort, but to better view the framed corporate value statement behind him. Integrity. respect, equality. The irony wasn't lost on her. Outside his office, a small crowd of employees had gathered, pretending to shuffle papers while watching the drama unfold through the glass walls. Thompson pulled up the bank's ancient computer system, the very one Sarah's team was scheduled to upgrade next month. His fingers pecked awkwardly at the keyboard, the sound echoing his growing frustration. "You see, Miss Chen, we've had several instances of..." He paused, searching for the right words, individuals attempting to deposit questionable checks. Sarah watched as he struggled with the computer, fighting the urge to point out that the system's lag was precisely why her company had been hired. Instead, she pulled out her own laptop. Its sleek design and custom security features a stark contrast to the outdated technology before her. The movement caught Thompson's attention, his eyes narrowing at the familiar logo sticker he couldn't quite place. Perhaps Sarah spoke for the first time since entering his office, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had built empires from keystrokes. "You'd like to see the contract associated with this payment." She opened a folder containing documents that could end this charade in seconds, but decided to let the moment teach its own lesson. Through the glass walls, the audience had grown. Jessica, the young teller, was now joined by several other employees, their expressions ranging from concern to curiosity. A young intern in the back, wearing a Stanford computer science hoodie, similar to the one Sarah's team favored, seemed to be putting the pieces together, his eyes widening in recognition. Thompson cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the tension-filled room. "Our procedures require verification of funds for transactions over certain amounts." He pulled out a form, its edges crisp with authority. "We'll need to hold the check for 7 business days, and you'll need to provide extensive documentation about your..." He glanced at her paint-stained jeans. "Business activities." A notification popped up on Thompson's computer. Ironically, a security alert developed by Sarah's team. She recognized the interface, having personally overseen its design. The alert, warning about system maintenance scheduled for next week, bore her company's logo. Thompson minimized it quickly, but not before Sarah caught the flicker of confusion crossing his face. Outside, the rain had settled into a steady rhythm, nature's soundtrack to this familiar dance of prejudice and power. Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time, a message from her VP of Operations about the bank's pending contract renewal. The amount made the check in question look like pocket change. "Mr. Thompson," Sarah began, her tone measured and professional, "would you like me to explain why your system just displayed that particular security notification?" She nodded toward his computer, watching as uncertainty crept into his previously confident demeanor. "Or perhaps we should discuss the Level 3 security protocols your branch installed last quarter." The mention of internal security measures caught him off guard. His hands stopped their incessant drumming, and for the first time, he really looked at Sarah, not as an anomaly to be questioned, but as someone who might know more than she should about his bank's operations. The growing crowd outside now included Frank, the security guard, who had positioned himself near the door with an expression that suggested he was witnessing something historic. Several of the bank's younger employees had stopped pretending to work, their attention fully captured by the scene unfolding before them. Thompson's desk phone chose that moment to ring, the sharp trill cutting through the tension. He reached for it automatically, then hesitated, suddenly unsure of his next move in this increasingly complex dance. The caller ID displayed a number he recognized, the regional director's office. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she watched Thompson's internal struggle play across his face. In her years of breaking barriers and building her company, she'd learned that sometimes the most powerful response to prejudice was to let it tangle itself in its own contradictions. As Thompson's hand hovered over the phone, Sarah reached into her laptop bag, preparing to reveal information that would transform this interaction from a routine display of bias into a moment of profound realization. The dance was about to change, and only one of them knew the next steps. As Thompson pontificated about unusual activities and security protocols, Sarah's phone lit up with an email from his boss, the bank's regional director, Looking forward to our contract renewal meeting, Sarah. Your cybersecurity updates have saved us millions. She smiled, her fingers tracing the edge of her company credit card. The one with National Trust's logo on it, issued to her as their most valuable corporate client. The email's notification sound cut through Thompson's rehearsed speech about banking regulations. He paused mid-sentence, momentarily distracted by Sarah's subtle shift in posture. The afternoon sun broke through the rain clouds, streaming through his office windows, illuminating the space between them with an almost theatrical quality. "Mr. Thompson," Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of a decade's worth of similar encounters, "would you mind pulling up the bank's current cybersecurity interface?" She watched his confusion bloom as she continued, "You'll find it under the TechVision Solutions portal. My company's logo should be quite visible on the login screen." The color began draining from Thompson's face as he mechanically followed her instructions. His fingers trembled slightly as he typed, each keystroke bringing him closer to an uncomfortable revelation. The familiar blue and silver logo of Sarah's company filled his screen. The same logo that was subtly embedded on her laptop, her phone case, and even the security card hanging forgotten around her neck. Outside the office, the impromptu audience had grown. Jessica, the yum teller, was now openly staring, her hand covering her mouth as recognition dawned. The Stanford intern had pulled out his phone, likely looking up TechVision Solutions and its CEO. The whispers had shifted from suspicious to astounded. "You see," Sarah continued, pulling up her own credentials on her laptop, "I find it particularly interesting that you're questioning this check when your bank has been one of our biggest clients for the past 3 years. She turned her screen toward him, displaying a dashboard of security protocols, all bearing her electronic signature as CEO. Thompson's desk phone rang again, this time with more urgency. The regional director's number flashed insistently on the display. Sarah could almost see the pieces falling into place in Thompson's mind as he glanced between her, the check, his computer screen, and the ringing phone. I don't understand," he stammered, his earlier authority evaporating like the morning's rain. "You're saying you're—" He couldn't quite bring himself to finish the sentence, the reality of his assumptions crashing down around his carefully maintained worldview. Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out a business magazine, the one where she'd been featured on the cover last month. She placed it gently on his desk, her photo staring back at him. The headline reading TechVision's Sarah Chen, Revolutionizing Banking Security. The office had grown eerily quiet, the only sound being the gentle hum of computers. Computers that ran on her company's software. Even the crowd outside had fallen silent, watching the scene unfold like the climax of a long-anticipated drama. "Perhaps," Sarah suggested, her tone professional, but carrying an edge of well-earned satisfaction, "we should discuss the upcoming security upgrade your branch is scheduled for next week. The one my team designed specifically for high-value transactions, like the check you're currently questioning." Thompson's tie suddenly seemed too tight as he loosened it with a shaking finger. The power dynamic had shifted so dramatically that even the family photo on his desk seemed to be judging him. His daughter's computer science hoodie in the graduation picture now felt like an additional layer of irony. Sarah's phone buzzed one final time. A message from her assistant confirming the regional director was trying to reach Thompson's office. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, a technological Greek chorus underlining the moment of recognition. Through the glass walls, Frank, the security guard, caught Sarah's eye and gave her a subtle nod of respect. He'd witnessed countless power plays in his decades at the bank, but never one that had unfolded quite like this. The younger employees were now huddled around a computer, likely pulling up articles about the woman their manager had just attempted to dismiss. The afternoon sun continued to stream through the windows, catching the edge of the check still lying on Thompson's desk, the check that had triggered this moment of reckoning. Sarah allowed herself a small smile, knowing that what happened next would ripple through the bank's corporate culture for years to come. The tables hadn't just turned. They had been completely reset. "Perhaps," Sarah interjected into Thompson's stunned silence, We should discuss how your current security protocols might be affected if TechVision Solutions decides not to renew its contract. She pulled up the bank's security infrastructure on her tablet, the one her company had designed. Thompson's face cycled through shock, recognition, and horror as realization dawned. His tie suddenly seemed too tight. The regional director's number flashed on Thompson's phone for the third time. This time, Sarah reached across the desk and answered it herself, putting it on speaker. "Hello, James," she said casually, as if she weren't sitting across from a man who'd just spent 20 minutes questioning her legitimacy. "I'm actually in your downtown branch right now, having an interesting conversation with Mr. Thompson about security protocols." The voice that boomed through the speaker carried equal parts warmth and alarm. "Sarah, I've been trying to reach Robert. We just saw the deposit notification. I trust everything is being handled appropriately." The emphasis on appropriately hung heavy in the air. Thompson's complexion had shifted from pale to ashen. "We're having quite the educational moment," Sarah replied, her eyes never leaving Thompson's face. "In fact, I think this might make an excellent case study for that diversity training program we discussed last month." The sound of nervous shuffling from the gathered audience outside the office suggested they understood the gravity of the situation. Thompson's computer screen still displayed the TechVision Solutions dashboard, where Sarah's name and photo appeared prominently in the admin panel. The same photo was now being passed around on smartphones among the watching employees, accompanied by headlines about the tech prodigy who'd revolutionized banking security before age 30. I had no idea," Thompson managed to stammer, his earlier confidence replaced by a devastating awareness. "Ms. Chen, I cannot begin to apologize." He reached for the check, the catalyst of this entire scenario. With trembling fingers, but Sarah raised her hand to stop him. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice carrying the weight of countless similar experiences, "what interests me more than your apology is what you plan to do with this moment." She gestured to the growing crowd outside his office. "Your younger employees just witnessed something that happens far too often in our industry. The question is, what lesson will you help them learn from it?" The regional director's voice cut through again. "Robert, I expect a full report on my desk by morning. Sarah, I look forward to our contract renewal meeting next week, though perhaps we should discuss expanding the scope of our diversity initiatives as well." The call ended, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Sarah opened her tablet's calendar, her fingers moving with purposeful precision. "I'm scheduling a training session for next month. Your branch will be the pilot program for our new corporate culture initiative." It wasn't a request, and Thompson knew it. "Sometimes," she continued, softer now, "the most powerful changes come from moments of uncomfortable recognition." Outside the office, Jessica, the young teller who'd first called Thompson, was wiping tears from her eyes. Sarah made a mental note to speak with her later. Young professionals needed to see both the challenges and triumphs of breaking barriers. The Stanford intern had transitioned from shocked observer to ardent photographer, documenting what he surely recognized as a pivotal moment in corporate culture. Thompson's family photo caught Sarah's eye again, his daughter in her computer science hoodie. "Your daughter," Sarah noted, gesturing to the picture. "She's in tech." The personal connection landed like a physical blow, forcing Thompson to confront his biases not just as a banker, but as a father whose own child might face similar prejudices. "Yes," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. She's actually applying for internships right now." The unspoken understanding passed between them. His daughter's future interviews, her professional challenges, her potential encounters with other Mr. Thompsons. Sarah stood, gathering her belongings with deliberate calm. The check remained on Thompson's desk, no longer just a financial instrument, but a symbol of the changes it had catalyzed. "I think," she said, reaching for her card holder, "we should talk about creating opportunities for emerging talents who might not fit the traditional banking profile." She placed her CEO business card on his desk, directly beside his daughter's photo. The afternoon sun had fully emerged from behind the clouds, flooding the office with clarifying light. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the most powerful changes in corporate culture didn't come from top-down mandates, but from moments like these, when personal revelation collided with professional responsibility. The branch fell silent as Sarah stood, her quiet authority filling the room. "Mr. Thompson, I believe your corridor displays need updating." She gestured to the bank's leadership photos, a monochrome tableau of identical suits and ties. "Though first, we should address why your branch hasn't implemented the diversity training modules my company developed for your corporate office." The gathered employees quickly dispersed, but not before several nodded in quiet support. As if orchestrated by fate, a young woman in a hijab approached Thompson's office, clutching her resume. She had been waiting for her interview with the branch manager, scheduled for that afternoon. Sarah caught the moment of panic that flashed across Thompson's face, his newfound awareness making this previously routine interview feel like a test he wasn't prepared for. "Perhaps," Sarah suggested, noting the young woman's computer science degree visible on her resume, "I should sit in on this interview." It wasn't really a question. Thompson's nod was barely perceptible, but it carried the weight of a man beginning to understand the depth of his transformation. Jessica, the teller, had returned to her window but kept glancing toward the office. Sarah made eye contact with her and gestured for her to join them. "We need more voices in this conversation," she explained as Jessica nervously entered the office, "especially from those who witness these interactions daily." The young job candidate, Amira according to her name tag, recognized Sarah immediately. Her eyes widened with admiration. She had used TechVision's coding tutorials during her university studies. The dynamic in the room shifted again as Thompson watched the easy rapport develop between these three women in tech. "Mr. Thompson," Sarah began, settling back into her chair, "let's talk about your branch's hiring statistics for the past 5 years." She pulled up the data on her tablet, information her company had access to through their security contracts. The numbers told a story of systematic exclusion, not through malice, but through unexamined tradition. Outside, the bank's routine operations had resumed, but there was a different energy now. Employees moved with a new awareness, stealing glances at the impromptu diversity panel forming in their manager's office. Frank, the security guard, had positioned himself where he could watch this historic moment unfold, his years of experience telling him something fundamental was changing. "Your daughter," Sarah addressed Thompson while pulling up TechVision's internship program on her tablet. "She's facing a 48% lower chance of being hired in tech compared to her male classmates." The statistic hung in the air like a challenge. "Would you like to be part of changing those odds?" Jessica spoke up, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I've been passed over for the junior investment advisor position twice," she revealed, despite having better qualifications than the men who got the role. Her hands were steady now, no longer the nervous teller from an hour ago. Amira added her perspective, describing the countless interviews where her technical skills were questioned simply because of her appearance. Thompson listened, really listened, perhaps for the first time in his career. The family photo on his desk seemed to watch the proceedings with particular interest. Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "James," she spoke to the regional director again, "I'm going to need you to clear your schedule for tomorrow. We're implementing immediate changes at the downtown branch." Her tone left no room for discussion. "And we'll be reviewing all hiring practices from the past 3 years." The afternoon light had shifted, casting long shadows across the office. Where there had been one story of bias confronted, there were now many voices rising to share their experiences. Thompson sat quietly, watching as his office transformed into ground zero for a cultural revolution he hadn't seen coming. "Starting next week," Sarah announced, addressing the broader audience that had gathered again outside the office, "this branch will pilot our new inclusive banking initiative." She turned to Thompson. "And you, Mr. Thompson, will be its public face, a testament to the power of acknowledging and addressing our biases." The check that had started it all still lay on Thompson's desk, but it had become secondary to the larger transaction taking place. the exchange of old prejudices for new understanding. Jessica straightened her nameplate, now wearing her ambitions openly. Amira clutched her resume with renewed confidence. Thompson, still processing the afternoon's events, began removing the outdated leadership photos from his wall. As the day drew to a close, the bank's atmosphere had shifted irreversibly. What had begun as a simple deposit had catalyzed a reckoning long overdue in the banking industry. Sarah watched as the first seeds of change took root, knowing that sometimes the biggest transformations start with a single moment of truth. Within a month, National Trust Bank's training manual featured Sarah's experience as a case study. Thompson didn't lose his job at her request. Instead, he became an unlikely ally in transforming the bank's culture, sharing his story of unconscious bias at industry conferences. The paint-stained jeans that had drawn such skepticism were now framed in the bank's headquarters, a reminder that innovation and success don't wear a uniform. The downtown branch had undergone a visible transformation. The wall of identical faces had been replaced by a diverse array of employee photos, each telling a story of unique paths to success. Jessica, now the branch's youngest investment advisor, had her photo prominently displayed, her achievement inspiring other tellers to pursue advancement opportunities. Amira, hired on the spot that fateful day, had revolutionized the branch's digital customer service system, implementing AI solutions that made banking more accessible to non-English speakers. Her hijab had become a familiar sight in executive meetings, where her technical expertise commanded the same respect that her appearance had once drawn doubt. Thompson's office had changed too. The mahogany desk remained, but it now faced the door in a more welcoming configuration. The family photo had been joined by others. His daughter's first day at her tech internship, secured through Sarah's mentorship program, Amira's system launch celebration, and a candid shot from the branch's first diversity training session. Sarah's company had turned the incident into a catalyst for industry-wide change. TechVision Solutions developed a comprehensive bias detection algorithm for banking transactions, flagging patterns of discriminatory behavior in customer service. The system, ironically, had been Thompson's idea, born from his newfound awareness of how unconscious bias influenced daily banking operations. The regional director had made good on his promise to expand their diversity initiatives. National Trust Bank now boasted the highest retention rate for women and minorities in the financial sector. Other banks started taking notice, and soon, Sarah found herself addressing industry leaders about the profitable intersection of diversity and innovation. Frank, the security guard who had witnessed it all, became an unofficial historian of the branch's transformation. He delighted in telling new employees about the day a woman in paint-stained jeans changed the face of banking. His stories always ended with a glance at the framed check on the wall, now displayed alongside Sarah's magazine cover. 1 year to the day after the incident, Sarah returned to the branch for a special ceremony. The bank was launching a scholarship program for underrepresented groups in finance and technology. As she cut the ribbon, wearing another pair of casual jeans, though paint-free this time, she caught Thompson's eye. He nodded, understanding passing between them. Sometimes the best teachers are our own mistakes. The young Stanford intern who had documented the original confrontation was now employed in the bank's tech department, leading a team as diverse as the customers they served. His viral photos of that day had become part of corporate training materials nationwide, teaching others to recognize and challenge their own biases. Jessica had started a mentorship program for female tellers, helping them navigate career advancement in finance. Her first success story was a young woman who reminded her of herself, nervous but capable, waiting for someone to see her potential. The program had spread to other branches, creating a network of support throughout the bank. The bank's customer demographics had shifted too. Word spread through communities traditionally underserved by financial institutions. Here was a bank that saw people, not stereotypes. Deposit accounts increased, loan applications diversified, and profits rose, proving that inclusion wasn't just ethically right, it was good business. Thompson's daughter eventually joined TechVision Solutions as a software engineer, her father's transformation having inspired her own journey in tech. She often joked that her dad's biggest mistake had led to her greatest opportunity. Thompson, now speaking at a national banking conference about bias in finance, had learned to laugh along. Sarah's company had moved into the building next door, its modern glass facade a stark contrast to the bank's traditional architecture. But instead of clashing, the two structures seemed to complement each other, tradition and innovation working in harmony. Through the windows, Thompson could see teams of diverse professionals working on the future of banking technology. The paint-stained jeans that started it all had become something of a legend in banking circles. Some said they were preserved in the bank's archives. Others claimed they were still worn by Sarah at board meetings. The truth didn't matter as much as the story they represented. A reminder that change often comes dressed in unexpected ways. As Sarah stood in the renovated lobby, watching the diverse flow of customers and employees, she smiled at the thought that sometimes the biggest revolutions start with a simple deposit and a pair of paint-stained jeans. The check that had caused such controversy had long since been processed, but its impact continued to compound with interest.